Good morning, cats and kitties. This is Tiny Dr. Tim coming at you from Internet Video Station WTIM. I'm here today because we had a snow day, and I did not want us to fall any further behind. So I thought what I'd do is spend a little bit of time helping you understand bacon the way I understand bacon. And I am rather familiar with bacon. So, in the introduction to the text, we've got some dates on him, 1561, 1626, so he's roughly contemporaneous with William Shakespeare. Interestingly, he is one of the ones that people who say Shakespeare didn't write his plays, they say Francis Bacon wrote his plays. Those theories are no longer given much credence these days. But what that does is it puts his birth about 20 years after Copernicus, who wrote De Revolutionibus, which is one of the things that can be seen as the launch of the scientific revolution. So what we're shifting to now is from texts that are about politics or have political content to one which is really about nature and the study of nature. But interestingly, Francis Bacon was a very political man. It says he was the High Lord Chancellor of England, but fell from power in 1621. So he's a man of many talents, many hats. But in the introduction it says he's writing about philosophy and science. And one of the things we need to understand is that at this time there were not yet people who identified as scientists. The people who we eventually came to recognize as scientists identified as natural philosophers. That is, they thought they were doing the philosophy of nature, and Bacon was one of those. And so throughout the reading, what we see is Bacon sort of responding. He's in one of those conversations, and he's largely talking back to Aristotle, because we're at this period in European history where the Renaissance has occurred. The Europeans have rediscovered the writers of the ancients. They've got Aristotle, they've got Plato, they even have, there's references to some of what are called the pre-Socratics, people like Democritus and Leucippus, who are otherwise referred to as the Ionian physicists. So these modern Europeans now have access to this ancient learning, but Aristotle has dominated what's known as scholasticism for some time. And even though Aristotle might be something of an empiricist in comparison to Plato, he does often operate deductively. So he's got this general rule about this is a situation that adheres in nature, and then here we have some evidence, and therefore we draw these conclusions. And Bacon is saying, and that is the source of a lot of problem, because Aristotle is not nearly empirical enough. So Bacon thought that Aristotelian deductive logic produced error, and indeed, if your major premise is false, you are going to get nothing but error after that. And they had some major premises that were somewhat erroneous about everything seeking the center of the earth, etc., rather than that gravity being something like an attraction between bodies. So, one of the things it says in the introduction is that Bacon despaired of any thoroughly objective inquiry in his own day, and I think it would be wise for us, even today, to despair of thoroughly objective inquiry. Objectivity is one of those things that when it's called for, you can be more or less objective, but I do not believe anybody can be thoroughly objective. The editors also point out that enumeration is one of the most common, most reliable rhetorical devices. So Bacon does a really good job of doing that. Tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them. So throughout his essay, he will have an introduction that says we're going to have 4 idols, and then for each idol, here's my idol, and then he goes through and details it, and then in the end he'll say, okay, we covered that one, and these were its parts. So it's a model of good arrangement in terms of reader-friendly arrangement. All right, so let's get into the idols. So the idols are kind of like, the false idols that we've read about in the Bible. It's not so much like American Idol. But he's got 4 idols: idol of the tribe, idol of the cave, idol of the marketplace, idol of the theater. And idol of the tribe is the one that just happens because we are human. So we are members of the tribe of humans. We have human nature. And so what we do is we do certain things that are just typically human, and they get in the way of us understanding things well. In paragraph 4, he uses a simile, and the human understanding is like a false mirror, which receiving rays irregularly distorts and discolors the nature of things, mingling its own nature with it. So what that means is if a human is looking at some phenomena in nature, such as the ichneumon wasp, then the human is likely to sort of read into the interpretation certain human moral traits and characteristics. So we need to be careful that when we look at nature, we realize that we are looking at it from a non-objective point of view, but a subjective point of view, from the subject of being a human. The Idols of the Cave might remind you of Plato's cave, but it's really not like that so much. But it talks about sort of conventional wisdom, and that you have a bunch of knowledge in your own cave, in your own den, and new knowledge comes in, and what you're going to do is you're going to look at it in light of not just what it means to be human, but in terms of to be you yourself. So you have a history, you have experience, and what will happen is your observations of anything new are going to be colored by your personal experience. Then we've got the idols of the marketplace, and that's the one that's conventional wisdom. He says, which I call the idol of the marketplace, and on account of the commerce and consort of men there. But words plainly force and overrule the understanding and throw all into confusion and lead men away into numberless empty controversies and idle fancies. So what happens is you've got a collection of attitudes and beliefs that you've picked up in your discussions and conversations with other people, and those things keep getting reinforced and ratified by other people, and things like stereotypes. So if you had a certain stereotype about a certain gender or about a certain race or about a certain sexual preference, what Bacon is claiming here is because you hold that stereotype, your ability to observe and to view something new is greatly compromised by the fact that the stereotype is impacting what you see. And then finally he's got the idol of the theater, and it's not theater so much in our sense of dramatic theater, putting on plays, but it's more about the fact that dramatic poetry is very concise and very compressed, and as a consequence it has a greater impact than, say, just plain history. So if you look at a theory written by Plato or written by Aristotle as a written thing, it's a work which has its own compression and condensation and revision, etc. These are almost like theatrical pieces. So when he's talking about the idols of the theater, he's talking about the impact of these finely written, finely honed, multiply revised pieces of philosophy that are works of fiction, in effect, because if it is writing, it is made. And so, therefore, that is what he wants to guard against when he's talking about the idols of the theater. I'm going to pause this right now because I see I have almost no electricity left in my battery, and I'll pause it, plug in this laptop, and come back shortly.